The evening sun cast a soft glow over the sprawling estate, its marble columns glistening in the fading light. Inside, Elena moved swiftly from room to room, her worn shoes silent against the polished floors. She carried a basket of freshly pressed linens, her fingers brushing over the smooth fabric before she placed it neatly on the bed. Though her work was demanding, she always carried herself with quiet pride, determined to do things with care, even if no one noticed. But someone did notice. From the upstairs balcony, Alexander Grant leaned against the railing, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. To the world, he was a man of immense wealth and power, commanding boardrooms and controlling empires with a single decision. Yet here, in his mansion, he watched the young woman who dusted the shelves and polished the silver. He often wondered why she intrigued him so much. She never complained, never sought attention. There was something dignified about her simplicity. Elena had no idea her every movement was sometimes observed. To her, Alexander was her employer, a man so far removed from her world it was almost laughable. Her concerns were practical, immediate, stretching her paycheck to cover her younger brother's tuition, making sure he had proper meals while she lived on bread and tea. That evening, however, something unusual stirred in her. She had promised her friend Rosa she would try to enjoy life for once, even if only for an evening. Rosa had teased her endlessly, telling her she needed to laugh, to go on a date, to be something other than a maid or a sister for a few hours. When Elena returned to her small room at the edge of the estate, she opened her dresser and stared at her modest clothes. There wasn't much to choose from. 2 plain skirts, a handful of faded blouses, and one dress she had saved for rare occasions. It was simple, navy blue, with a frayed hem she had stitched herself. She pulled it out carefully, smoothing the wrinkles with her palm. Tonight, she had only $5 tucked inside her purse. It wasn't much, barely enough for coffee and perhaps a slice of pie, but she told herself it would be enough. The thought of spending money frivolously made her chest tighten, but she wanted to keep her promise to Rosa. She tied her hair into a loose braid and studied her reflection in the small cracked mirror. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine she was just a young woman going out, not someone burdened with endless responsibility. She dabbed on a touch of rose-tinted lip balm, the cheapest one she could afford, and drew in a breath. Tonight wasn't about luxury. Tonight was about remembering she was still alive, still capable of joy. Alexander happened to pass by the hallway then, heading toward his study. He caught a glimpse of her slipping out the back door. She didn't look like the quiet maid he usually saw in uniform. She looked softer, almost luminous, even in her modest dress. His brow furrowed with curiosity. Where could she be going at this hour? And why did a flicker of unease settle in his chest at the thought of her leaving alone? Without entirely knowing why, he found himself shrugging on his coat and stepping outside minutes later. His driver looked surprised when he ordered the car. No destination, Alexander said curtly, though in his mind, the destination was already clear. He wanted to see where Elena was going, what kind of life she lived beyond these walls he had built around her labor. Elena walked briskly toward the bus stop, clutching her small purse against her side. She didn't notice the sleek black car that trailed at a careful distance behind her. Her heart beat fast, a mix of nerves and hope. She wondered if the man she was meeting would be kind, if he would see past her plain clothes and calloused hands. She prayed he wouldn't ask too many questions about her work or her family, because lies tasted bitter on her tongue, and truth carried shame she couldn't bear to speak. As the bus rattled toward the city lights, Elena stared out the window, her reflection faint against the glass. She felt like a stranger to herself, a girl daring to step outside her boundaries. Little did she know, a pair of sharp eyes watched from another car, silently guarding, silently judging, and perhaps, silently caring. Her evening was about to unfold in ways neither she nor the billionaire shadowing her could have predicted. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly, its flickering light painting the cracked sidewalk with shades of red and blue. Elena stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming as she clutched her purse tightly to her side. The air smelled of fried food and burnt coffee, and the checkered floor was worn from years of footsteps. It wasn't glamorous, but it was warm, and to her, it was enough. She paused for a moment, scanning the room until her eyes landed on a man waving lazily from a booth near the back. He was tall, dressed in a shirt that tried too hard to impress, the kind of man who wanted to be noticed without much effort. Finally, he said with a smirk as she slid into the seat across from him. "I thought you'd gotten cold feet." "No," Elena replied softly, offering a polite smile. "The bus was just a little late." He didn't respond with kindness. Instead, his eyes swept over her dress, the frayed hemline, the scuffed shoes she had polished until they shone. His smirk deepened. "That's what you wore." Heat rose to Elena's cheeks, but she kept her tone steady. "It's my best dress." The man leaned back, arms crossing over his chest. "Right. Well, let's order. I'm starving." He snapped his fingers toward the approaching waitress, who forced a smile as she handed them menus. Elena opened hers, scanning quickly. The numbers made her stomach twist. Even the cheapest items hovered near $5. She calculated silently. Tax, tip, she couldn't afford anything more than a simple cider drink. Her date, however, seemed oblivious, rattling off an order of steak and fries with extra sides. When the waitress turned to Elena, she hesitated before whispering, "Just water, please. And, maybe the small soup." The waitress gave her a long, pitying glance before scribbling it down. The man laughed, shaking his head. "Water and soup, what is this, a charity meal?" Elena's fingers tightened around her purse under the table. "It's what I'd like," she murmured, trying to keep her dignity intact. His voice rose, drawing attention from a nearby table. "Come on, don't be ridiculous. A date's supposed to be fun. You don't have to be so cheap." The word hit her like a slap. Cheap. She'd heard it before, whispered behind her back at school when she couldn't afford new shoes, muttered by neighbors when she picked up discarded furniture to repair. Still, hearing it here, in front of strangers, cut deeper than she expected. From a dimly lit corner booth, Alexander watched. He had entered quietly, choosing a seat where he wouldn't be noticed, his broad shoulders tucked into the shadows. His jaw tightened as he listened, the ice in his untouched glass clinking softly. Every instinct told him to rise, to put an end to the mockery, but something stopped him. He wanted to see how Elena handled herself. The food arrived quickly, steaming plates filling the table. Elena's small bowl of soup looked even more meager beside the man's overflowing plate. He dug in noisily, chewing with his mouth open, while Elena lifted her spoon delicately, ignoring the burn as the hot broth touched her tongue. She told herself to focus on the warmth filling her stomach, not the eyes she felt on her. "So, what do you even do?" the man asked between bites. "You didn't really say much." Elena hesitated. If she told the truth, that she was a maid working in the home of a billionaire, he might laugh harder, or worse, pity her. "I work in housekeeping," she said carefully. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Figures. That explains the dress." Her grip on the spoon tightened, but she refused to look away. "There's nothing wrong with honest work." His laughter grew louder, drawing the attention of more diners. "Relax, I'm just saying. But really, if this is what you call a night out, I don't think we'll be a good match." Elena's heart ached, but her face remained calm. "Then perhaps you shouldn't have asked me out." For a moment, his smirk faltered, and he leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You've got a bit of an attitude for someone who can't even afford dinner." He tossed his napkin on the table and pushed back his chair. "You know what? Forget this." He left abruptly, the bell above the diner door jingling in his wake. Conversations resumed around the room, but the sting of their whispers lingered. Elena sat frozen, staring at the bill tucked under the edge of the plate. Her soup and water had cost more than she had planned, but she reached into her purse and pulled out her 5 crumpled dollars. Alexander, still hidden, watched the quiet resolve in her eyes as she placed the money down. No tears, no begging, no anger. Just quiet dignity, even in humiliation. His chest tightened, and he knew, something had shifted inside him tonight. The diner had grown quieter after the man's departure, the clatter of cutlery and low hum of conversation returning to normal as though nothing had happened. But for Elena, the silence pressed in on her. She stared at the $5 she had slid across the table, the wrinkled bills that represented the only luxury she had allowed herself in weeks. Her fingers lingered on the edge of her purse, reluctant to let go, but she straightened her back and nodded to the waitress when she came to collect the payment. The waitress hesitated, eyes softening. "Are you sure, honey? That's all you're leaving? Elena flushed. It's all I have. The woman gave her a small smile of pity before taking the bills and walking away. Elena stared down at her soup bowl, half empty and already cold, feeling the weight of humiliation heavier than the hunger in her belly. She thought about leaving quickly, before the shame could spread further, before the strangers' stares could burn deeper into her skin. She gathered her purse and rose, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Before she could take a step, a tall figure moved into her path. Elena froze, her heart leaping. Alexander Grant stood before her, impossibly out of place in the dingy diner. His tailored coat, his polished shoes, his commanding presence, all of it belonged to another world, one that had no business colliding with hers tonight. "Mr. Grant," she whispered, disbelief and dread flooding her chest. He ignored the title, setting a crisp $100 bill on the table with a quiet finality that drew the waitress's gasp. "For the trouble," he said, his voice steady, low, carrying the weight of authority. The room shifted, conversations halted, eyes turned. Whispers spread as people recognized him, or at least recognized his wealth, his aura of power. Elena's stomach knotted. This was the very thing she had feared. Pity wrapped in extravagance, charity dressed as generosity. She shook her head quickly, her voice trembling. "No, please, you don't need to. I'm not here out of pity," Alexander interrupted, his gaze fixed on her. His eyes, sharp and clear, softened in their depth. "I watched you handle cruelty with more grace than most people could muster. I couldn't leave without telling you that." Her breath caught. The honesty in his words unsettled her more than his money. "You saw everything," he nodded. "Every word, every laugh, every insult you endured without breaking." Elena lowered her eyes, her cheeks burning. "Then you saw me humiliated. That isn't dignity, Mr. Grant. It's survival." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Survival can be the greatest form of dignity. You didn't lash out. You didn't beg. You simply stood your ground. That takes strength most people don't have." The sincerity in his voice pulled at something deep inside her. But the gulf between them loomed larger than ever. She shook her head again, her voice barely audible. "You shouldn't have followed me. This isn't your world." "And yet here I am," he replied, a flicker of something, curiosity, defiance, maybe even admiration, in his eyes. The waitress returned with change, holding out the excess from the $100 bill. Alexander waved it off, leaving the stunned woman clutching the notes. Then, turning back to Elena, he extended his hand, not as an employer, not as a man of wealth, but as someone simply asking for trust. "Let me take you home," he said. Elena hesitated, torn between pride and exhaustion. The weight of the night pressed on her shoulders, and though every instinct told her to refuse, another part of her longed for the safety he seemed to offer. Slowly, she nodded. The two of them stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights glowed faintly in the distance, but here, under the buzzing diner sign, it felt as though time had paused. Alexander opened the door to his sleek black car, the contrast between her frayed dress and his polished world more glaring than ever. She slid into the seat reluctantly, her heart racing. As the car pulled away, Elena stared out the window, watching the neon signs fade into darkness. She felt exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely comforted. Alexander sat beside her, silent for a long while, before finally speaking. "I didn't realize how little I knew about you until tonight. You've been working in my house for months, and I've never truly seen you until now." Elena swallowed hard. "Because people like me aren't meant to be seen, Mr. Grant. We're meant to blend into the background." He turned to her then, his gaze unwavering. "Not anymore." Her heart skipped, unsure whether to trust his words or guard herself against them. But deep down, she sensed that something had shifted, not just for her, but for him too. And though she couldn't name it yet, she knew this night had marked the beginning of something she never could have imagined. The ride back to the estate was shrouded in a silence that felt both heavy and strangely comforting. Elena kept her gaze fixed on the window, watching the blurred lights of the city streak by as though they belonged to another life, one she could never touch. She toyed nervously with the strap of her purse, her thoughts tumbling over one another. She should have been furious that Alexander had followed her, that he had witnessed the most humiliating evening of her life. Yet beneath the shame was something else, something she didn't want to name, gratitude and an unsettling warmth at his words. Alexander, meanwhile, sat in the dim interior of the car, his profile illuminated by passing streetlights. He had been in countless negotiations, had faced down rivals and secured billion-dollar deals without a flicker of doubt. But tonight, in the presence of the quiet maid who had faced cruelty with poise, he felt unmoored. He found himself stealing glances at her, studying the way she clutched her purse like armor, the way her shoulders curved inward as though bracing against the world. When the car finally rolled to a stop at the gates of the estate, Elena exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She reached for the door handle immediately, eager to escape the closeness of the moment, but Alexander's voice stopped her. Elena. She froze. He rarely said her name. Usually it was, Miss Rivera, or simply nothing at all when giving instructions. Hearing her name in his voice sent a strange shiver through her. Yes, Mr. Grant, she asked softly, still avoiding his eyes. Don't diminish yourself because of what happened tonight, he said firmly. That man tried to belittle you, but he only revealed his own smallness. You showed more strength sitting there with $5 in your hand than he's ever shown in his life. Her throat tightened, and for once, she couldn't hide behind practiced composure. Strength. She let out a bitter laugh. I felt small. I felt pathetic. I couldn't even buy a proper meal without worrying. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his tone gentler now. Pathetic as giving in to cruelty. You didn't. You endured. That takes more than money. That takes character. Elena finally turned her head, meeting his gaze. His eyes were steady, earnest, lacking the arrogance she had always associated with his kind. For the first time, she saw not a billionaire, but a man, one who seemed to believe every word he was saying. The driver opened her door, breaking the moment. Elena stepped out, the cool night air brushing her skin. She walked quickly toward her small quarters at the edge of the estate, desperate to retreat before her emotions betrayed her. But Alexander followed, his footsteps deliberate against the gravel path. Elena, he called again, and she stopped, though her back remained to him. You don't have to follow me, she said, her voice trembling. I'm just your maid. Tonight doesn't change that. He moved closer, his words measured but filled with conviction. It changes everything. Tonight I realized how blind I've been. You're not just someone who keeps my house in order. You're someone I want to truly know. Her breath caught, and she turned slowly to face him. Why? Because you pity me. Because I respect you, he answered without hesitation. And because I can't stop thinking about how you carried yourself when the world tried to tear you down. The vulnerability in his voice startled her. Men like Alexander didn't expose themselves, didn't step down from their pedestals to speak as equals. Yet here he was, standing in the cool night, telling her she mattered. Elena shook her head, torn between disbelief and the dangerous flutter in her chest. I don't belong in your world. Maybe not, he admitted softly. But perhaps I need to step into yours. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of possibility hanging between them. Finally, Elena lowered her eyes, her voice barely more than a whisper. I don't know if I can trust this. You don't have to, Alexander said. Not yet. Just let me prove that I see you, not the uniform you wear, not the $5 you had tonight. You. Her heart pounded. She wanted to retreat, to shield herself from hope. But something about the sincerity in his voice cracked through her defenses. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a maid, not as a poor girl, but as a woman with worth beyond measure. She gave him a small, hesitant nod. We'll see, she whispered before retreating into her quarters. Alexander stood outside a while longer, staring at the closed door. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, he didn't know what came next. All he knew was that everything had changed. Inside her room, Elena sat on the edge of her narrow bed. Her hands trembling. The humiliation of the evening lingered, but so did something else, an ember of possibility. She didn't know if she could let it burn. But as she lay down and closed her eyes, she realized that her life would never be the same again. And neither would his.